You guys did great, especially for sight reading. Now, I bet you're saying to yourself, I now know why they give Billy a nice long break. Okay, so that was 42 hit songs. 42 songs like you've never heard them before. But can you believe they had that many hits? And guess what? They had many, many more hits. In fact, Randy and Kay. Randy, if you'll get on the keyboard, and Kay, no, that's all right. I'm just kidding. All right. I couldn't resist. All right. Yeah. Let me move this down so y'all can see better. There you go. But you know, we didn't even sing the song that started Beatlemania in America. Their first number one hit song here in the United States, the first song that became their best-selling single worldwide, the song the Beatles themselves would call our big number one, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Now think about it. Out of all of those hits, this greatest hit of hits was based on one simple phrase. I want to hold your hand. That must be one powerful phrase. And it is. Now think about it. Well, let me say this. When I was a child, I dated a girl named Beth Harris, and we dated for 7 years. We started when we were in kindergarten. I'm not kidding. We dated from age 5 to age 12. We were quite the couple. Our parents would drop us off at the movies or at Shoney's or somewhere to eat. We were very serious. I always thought I would marry Beth, and I did. Some of you don't know about that. I officiated her wedding at Tybee a number of years ago. But I didn't hold Beth's hand very often. I wanted to. Oh, I really wanted to, but I was just too chicken. Once in a while, I would get up the nerve to reach out, or perhaps she would take the initiative, and we held hands, and it was the greatest thing in the world. Amazing, magical, electric. And it was amazing, magical, and electric when I first started holding Sherry's hand. And it still is. My heart still flutters when I hold Sherry's hand. And my heart flutters when I hold your hand. Not in the same way as it flutters when I hold Sherry's hand. But it flutters. It's electric. When we hold someone's hand, or when we put an arm across a friend's shoulder, the body releases neurological chemicals like oxytocin and serotonin that feel good, while at the same time they inhibit chemicals that cause stress. There's a reason that it feels good. But touch just doesn't feel good. It is vital to being human. When babies and children are deprived of touch, their brain development is permanently impaired, which can destroy the growth of social abilities and can result in lower intelligence. When our government did this horrible, horrible thing of separating families, of keeping children away from their parents, not only has it been painful and cruel, it's caused scars that will last a lifetime. And we did this without even knowing how to get them back together. It's incredible. And there still are thousands of children crying themselves to sleep at night, not to mention their parents. As one mother said, it feels like torture, a slow death. She needs to touch her child, and her child needs to be touched. Our text today is about Jesus, who, by the way, was an immigrant and refugee. Let's not forget that. The text is about Jesus holding a little girl's hand and bringing her back to health and wholeness. There's actually a story within this story. We skipped over some of the verses of the passage today. The story starts with a wealthy man named Jairus coming to Jesus and saying, "Please help me. My daughter is dying. Please come with me." And Jesus agrees to do what he can. He agrees to go with him. And as he is following Jairus, as he is going through the crowd, he stops and says, "Wait, someone has touched me." And the disciples are going, "Wait, we're in a crowd. Yeah, you're being bumped." No. Someone has touched me for a purpose, has intentionally touched me. I felt the power going out, the energy, the flutter, the connection. Come to find out, a woman who had been bleeding, hemorrhaging for many years, had reached out and touched Jesus in order to be helped and healed. And so here is this very masterful story of Jesus on his way to help a little girl from a very wealthy family who is very sick and in trouble, being interrupted by an older woman who is very poor and who is very sick and in trouble. And Jesus stops and helps her. And can't you imagine Jairus? I'd be this way. He's pacing. "Come on, we don't have time for this. My daughter is dying. How much money do you want? Whatever you want, I'll pay you. I'll give it to you. Just come on." But no, Jesus takes time with the woman so she experiences healing and wholeness. And then they continue on their way, but by the time they get to Jairus' house, the little girl is dead. Jesus takes her by the hand. He holds her hand and says, "Little girl, get up." And she does. Now, what's really interesting is that when Jesus was touched by the older woman who was hemorrhaging and bleeding, that act made Jesus unclean. What she did was against the law. She wasn't supposed to touch a male. But because she did, she made Jesus unclean. So he wasn't supposed to touch anyone else until he went through a ceremony of religious persecution. He broke the law. So this story gives us two healings involving touch, a healing within a healing, both involving a risk-taking touch. As you know, Jackie Robinson was the first African American to play Major League Baseball. You may not be as familiar with the second African American, a man named Larry Doby. Larry played for the Cleveland Indians. During the late 1940s and early 50s, Doby would become an all-star center fielder and the first African American to hit a home run in a World Series. He's now in the Hall of Fame. But things did not start out well for Larry. When he walked into the locker room just after joining the team, no one would shake his hand. When he went on the field before his first game, no one would throw him the ball. It all came to a head when he stepped up to the plate for the very first time. Larry had been signed because he was a great hitter in the Negro League. But at his first time up at bat, he struck out just on 3 straight pitches. And when he walked back to the dugout, he was booed by fans and by players. When I walked into the dugout, Larry would say, I was angry. I was humiliated. And I was ready to quit. I didn't want any part of breaking this racial barrier. And then it happened. As I sat there on the bench with my head in my hands, Joe Gordon, a white outfielder whose place I had taken in the lineup, sat down next to me. He didn't say anything. He simply put his arm around me and gave me a quick squeeze and pat on the shoulder. Then he got up and walked away as the other players glared at him. It was a small act, Larry would say, a simple touch. But it was an act that put a crack in the racial barriers I was experiencing, and it gave me the strength to go on. One simple touch. God used Jesus' hands to break social barriers and bring healing and wholeness. God used Joe Gordon's hands to break racial barriers that would bring healing and wholeness. God can use our hands to break the barriers that tend to divide people in our city, in our country, and in our world. A gentle hug, a warm handshake, an arm around the shoulder, a pat on the back, a high five, a fist bump, and other forms of appropriate touch have the power to bring physical, relational, emotional, social, and spiritual healing. In 1992, a professor of pediatrics and psychiatry named Dr. Tiffany Fields established the Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami School of Medicine. Dr. Fields believes that our lack of healthy touch is one of the reasons we struggle with so many issues in our country. She says that a lack of healthy touching among students and adults could explain why sexual promiscuity and teenage pregnancy are on the increase. Could even explain the increasing incidence of eating disorders and addictive behaviors. She argues that in other cultures where there is a lot of physical touch, especially among infants and children, adult physical aggression and violence is low. Her implications for our own society are very clear, even as our culture increasingly embraces bodily indulgences of sex, food, and other appetites. We are actually turning away from one another socially. Our lack of physical contact is related to increasing isolation, she says, which leads to depression and suicide. Americans have been shown to have fewer close friendships than a century ago, while the number of Americans with no close friendships has tripled. Many people lack a close confidant who can serve as a listening ear for personal conversation. While physical touch overcomes this sense of isolation, as we pull back from one another relationally, we also pull back physically. In a society where touch is primarily associated with sexual desire, the church can articulate a strong theology of healthy touch, offering a way forward so people can be connected, can be in relationships, can be made whole. For we are not merely creatures of belief formed by studies and sermons. We are also beings with feelings and desires who need to be in relationship with one another. And each time we reach out and touch someone, when we do that, we communicate the tangible truth of the gospel, that God reaches out to each of us with love and compassion. We are vessels of God's presence in the world. We have the responsibility of revealing to others that God desires to be in relationship with each of us. In 2007, television and radio host Larry King interviewed Paul McCartney and Ringo. He asked them about John Lennon's death and George Harrison's death, how it affected them. Paul said that obviously there was nothing good about John's death from a shooting and at such a young age. But then Paul said there were some good things that surrounded George's death, who died of cancer. Paul said that he got to see George a short time before he died. He said it was just the best. We sat like this, like we are now, and then Paul extended his hand and took Ringo's hand and held it. Paul said, we sat just like this, just stroking hands like this. And he showed how he used his thumb to gently rub George's hand as he held it. Paul said, we were doing this, and this is a guy I've known since he was a little kid. And you don't hold hands and stroke hands with guys, but it was just beautiful. A favorite memory of mine. Will you go forth to hold people's hands? Will you go forth to be disciples of the one who touched people, who offered love, hope, and peace to a hurting world? I know you can. I know you can do it, because God wants to hold your hand and does hold your hand. And the people of God said, Amen. Which means, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it